thousands of flood victims continue to pick up the pieces in KwaZulu-Natal this afternoon, the United Nations in South Africa has provided, or promised at least, to provide assistance. The death toll has now passed the 400 mark and damage to infrastructure is estimated at 10 billion rand. Let's find out what sort of assistance the UN is able to provide in such a disaster situation. I'm joined by the head of UN South Africa, Ayodele Odusola. Mr. Odusola, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the program. So, how are you able to assist in such a disaster?
Thank you, Tembekile. This is one of the things that United Nations program all over the world really handles. We have different agencies that are designated to handle issues like this. In South Africa, well, let me just start by saying the United Nations in South Africa really sent condolence to the government and people of KwaZulu-Natal and the families who have lost their loved ones. And we really think there are so many ways of doing this. Part of the current thing that are going on, our colleagues are really on the ground, working with the various government and NGOs on the ground to really assist. But the starting point is the building on the partnership we already have with the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs as a result of the government involvement of the United Nations in the district development model, which Etequeni is one of them, and also in partnership with the government of KwaZulu-Natal as a result of the July unrest, and also the partnership the United Nations Development Program has with the National Disaster Management Center. So it provides opportunity for us to really engage without any challenge. But essentially what we are currently doing is working with our agencies that deal with issues like this, particularly the World Food Program that is mandated by the United Nations General Assembly to handle issues of disaster, particularly providing basic services in emergencies like this. So we are currently working with them in terms of how we can accelerate work in this area, particularly those that need food parcels. And also we are working with the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, that handles emergency situations like this. We are currently working with them to provide regional capabilities beyond what we have in South Africa to really support this particular initiative.
So I want to ask you about the level of assistance that you can give, because the United Nations is no stranger to natural disasters, and the SADC region, which South Africa is part of, is very familiar with this sort of disaster. I mean, when you look at events as recently in Mozambique in January, where they too had devastating flooding.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are a number of things we are currently working on in terms of doing that. First of all the 17 United Nations agencies that are operating in South Africa have been asked to reprogram their activities in terms of the strategic support they have for KwaZulu-Natal in supporting this particular disaster, managing it and making sure that the activities are effectively coordinated. And we are also calling on the donor community and international community that are resident in South Africa to provide a coordinated support to the government and people of KwaZulu-Natal in addressing this particular disaster. We are also working with various NGOs on the ground, particularly United Nations International Children Emergency Fund is currently working with some NGOs on the ground to really deal with victims of informal settlement, and also working with faith-based organizations to deal with children that are badly affected by this particular disaster. So there are a number of initiatives which we are trying to do in terms of going ahead with this, not only in terms of trying to work with the government and people of KwaZulu-Natal, because we are currently discussing with the Office of the Premier and Office of the Etequeni municipality to really ensure that we do not only handle the short-term and the emergency need, but work with them on medium-term and long-term structural development that will avert.
And let's talk about structural development, because in your initial reaction to the disaster in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the things you said was important was for town planners to come on board to make sure that future development is set up in such a way that risk of this sort of tragedy is reduced.
Thank you very much, Tembekile. Actually, that's one of the things we are trying to call, because emergency like this is a clarion call to our town planners to ensure that we don't have houses built on waterways or floodplains. We have to make sure that the existing laws are effectively implemented and really implemented without fear or favor. And one of the things the United Nations in South Africa wants to do is to work with our town planners and let them see how things like this have been done in other countries that have experienced things like this, and what are the kind of resilient facilities they are putting in place. Because what we have seen is a clarion call to the fact that climate change is a development imperative. We have to ensure that, one, the rising urbanization is really accompanied with the level of infrastructural development. And old infrastructures in cities like Durban are also really make sure they are climate resilient. And also we ensure that industries in any part of South Africa is really carbon free in a way that it doesn't aggravate the current situation. So our call as United Nations in South Africa is to call on the people and government of South Africa that climate change action should go beyond the issue of decarbonization. We have to prioritize what we call strategic actions that really adapt to climate change technologies as well as infrastructure to make sure that our societies and communities are resilient to climate change.
Let's talk about adapting. I referenced Mozambique earlier. Malawi, also in the same region as South Africa, has had an issue with flooding in the not too far away past, right? Are the governments of the region, including Pretoria, South Africa, are they moving fast enough to respond to what appears to be a rapidly evolving weather and climate situation?
Thank you very much. What we always know is that Africa, and particularly Southern African countries, contribute the least to the issue of causes of climate change in the world. But they receive one of the hardest hit in terms of the impact on the ground. And because of the impact, Cyclone Idai in Mozambique is another thing that is similar to this, which is calling us that it's not only things that national government can do, but regional actors need to come together because climate change does not know about boundaries and borders. So we are calling on SADC Secretariat. We're trying to see how we work with them to really make sure that they build on the national capacity to bring in regional experience so that it facilitates action towards climate action, because we need to really move very fast. Otherwise, the impact might be difficult for us to handle, not only in terms of economic implications, but also in terms of social and the loss of life.
I'm glad you mentioned economic performance and the effects of climate change on that, because part of the reason some say there's been resistance to fast-tracking cutting carbon emissions and some of the other changes that are needed as far as protecting the environment has been that there is money in not doing that, right? So business is interested in operating in spaces where they don't have to follow such strict rules around climate and pollution. Do you think that is influencing the speed at which SADC is responding?
Thank you very much. The role of the business sector is really very important in dealing with the issue of climate change, because they play a very strong role in climate change adaptation and mitigation. So the idea, one of the things the United Nations is playing all over the world is that our business community should should do away with profit first by adopting what we call triple bottom lines, where we look at economic profitability for companies, but also we look at social and environmental profitability. So this triple bottom line is that we have to make sure the technology we are using, our production plants, are not things that are aggravating the climate change in our countries. And that is one of the things we are really galvanizing across the SADC countries and also across the African continent. We need to really bring the private sector on board because they contribute a lot in terms of facilitating the process of climate change adaptation. So, and I'm calling the media too to help us advocate this, because it's when we work together that we'll be able to really meet the challenges of climate change, and we'll be able to create the kind of advocacy that is needed. Everybody has a role to play, not only the government, the private sector, the communities, the civil society organization, and international development partners need to come to the aid of African countries, particularly South Africa and SADC, in making sure that the issue of climate change impact is really addressed, and we have to find a way of averting issues like these affecting lives of people in the country.
Mr. Ayodele Odusola, good to have your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me.